Hello and welcome to our Mission Team podcast. My name is Patrick Magyar, and today my guest is Rory Steyn. He will actually be a guest for two podcast episodes because Rory is in fact a living legend. Not only is he one of the greatest security experts I know, and that will be the topic of the first podcast, learning from a person who is ready to put his life in danger to help others. And the second podcast is going to be about his experiences as one of the protection team leaders of President Nelson Mandela. In this function, Rory has become a legend in the industry, and I look very much forward to everything we can learn from him and from the great Madiba Nelson Mandela. Hey, Rory, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you, sir.
Rory, actually, we are going to do two podcasts. We're going to do a first podcast about your own experiences and the way you're building teams in the security business. And then we're going to do a second one about what you and we all can learn from the great Nelson Mandela. Today, let's focus on your experiences and your knowledge. I had the privilege of working with you in security business, and I was always very impressed at how extremely calm you are. And whenever people got excited, Rory was such like a rock, like a mountain where people came. Is that the quality you need when you work in an industry where it's about life and death?
Patrick, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to speak again after a long time. I've always been very grateful to you for the opportunities that you opened up for me personally and for our company, and having me at the Weltklasse in Zurich with my wife. So just a big thank you to that. It's a privilege to be here. So to your question, yes, I think it is a quality that especially police officers, but also, many other professionals require. And the point is, Patrick, I'm not sure that calmness is something that you can train. I think that as a consequence of certain training, you can enhance the level of calmness and calm thinking under pressure. But my sense is it's probably something that you are born with. So I don't want to claim any special gift in that regard, other than to say that I think it is something that I was endowed with from birth. And I've spoken to police officers. I've actually spoken to one police colleague of mine in particular who came under fire from criminals in the parking lot of a supermarket. And he explained to me, cop to cop, that for him, everything slowed down, and he was able to very calmly and almost serenely see what was needed to do. And he knew that he had a lot of time to do that. And that's what I mean when I say that I don't think that is something that you can necessarily train. I think it's something that you're born with. Yeah.
However, is that something that you would say when you select leaders in your teams, they need to bring that, or does just simply everybody in such an industry need to bring that forward?
I don't think so. I think any industry, I think you need teams that comprise of all kinds of people and all kinds of personalities, because what you don't want is where it's one size fits all. It's a little bit cookie cutter and everybody looks like the other and behaves like the other. I think you need a mix. And gender plays a role there as well, Patrick. I always say when I'm asked about my time with President Mandela's team that I'm very grateful for the very good, excellent even women that we had on our team. And it takes all of that to blend a good team, because at various times during what the team is trying to achieve and on various occasions and for various results and purposes, I think those gifts all come to bear at different times and very welcome. So I'm not saying that there is a time and a place for a very excitable personality, but I think that such a personality can bring good energy to a team. By and large, in what I do, though, you do need cool heads and calm thinking. And as I say, that can be enhanced. And as long as everybody understands what their strengths and weaknesses are, I think that builds a very good and a well-rounded, a holistic team. So the product that is sold or presented to the client can be a holistic product. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and actually, this strengths approach that you have. I
Yeah.
remember when you were discussing about who was going to do what, you
Mm.
very specifically always chose people based on their strengths. You never in the team briefing said to me afterwards, I sent this guy because this guy can't do very well this sort of things, etc. You always said, I'm sending this guy because this is the best person to do that.
Correct. And that's one of the functions of a leader. And you can translate that into any aspect of leadership, is the ability to identify in people, despite personality traits, but look at inherent strengths and weaknesses, because you can always work on the weaknesses. But when a person brings a particular strength, then two things happen. One, the leader has a good asset that he can or she can deploy once you understand that that person's strength would do well in that particular circumstance or environment. And the other thing it does is it gives confidence to that person who possesses that particular strength. If you say to them, like your example, I say to a person, I'm sending you specifically to do this job or to achieve this outcome because I believe that it's perfectly suited to your strength, which is X, Y, and Z. Then you imbue that person with a lot of confidence to say, wow, my commander or my leader or my manager or my CEO identifies that strength in me, and I know that that's a strength of mine, so I feel that I can do this. Whereas if you send somebody there to say, I'm sending you there, I want to give you a chance because I think you might be able to do that, then the person is not so sure either of their own ability. And so then I think you land up with a product that is perhaps less effective.
And one of the topics that I'm always trying to tell people when I'm like in a leadership seminar is that actually working with the strengths is of the people is the best way to create trust, because it is self-confidence, and self-confidence is a kind of a trust in yourself that you're boosting first, and on that basis your trust towards your colleagues also gets bigger.
That's exactly right. And trust, and we can speak about this when I talk about the experience that I had with the two very disparate teams of protection officers that had to come together to protect the most important person in the world, Patrick, because you mentioned trust, and trust is something that requires time to develop. I cannot meet you today and trust you tomorrow. Even if somebody says to me, Rory, you can trust Patrick Magyar. I've known him for 30 years and he's a trustworthy person. That's a good place to start. But I need to discover for myself by spending time with you and understanding who you are as Patrick, that this is indeed somebody that I can trust. A recommendation is a very good place to start, though. You must never dismiss that.
And I think it has to do with the fact that trust needs to be earned through action. It's, yes, you can create an impulse of trust through talking, and it gives a first fit. But whether trust is justified or not only comes to be realized through continued action.
That's right. Patrick, I've just returned from the United States where I was there for about 2.5 weeks doing a speaking tour, primarily in Texas, and I was telling stories. We call it stories of hope and reconciliation, based on my times with the president. And one of the things that I said over and over again, other than the fact that trust takes time to develop, is that, and obviously in the position that we worked in, trust was an absolute requirement. I mean, we were placed in a position that required the utmost level of loyalty and trust. And I know it's a cliche, even in business leadership, to say that you can train pretty much any skill, but you can't teach values and integrity and honesty. Because if a person doesn't have that, they can be the very best operator at what they do. But at some point, if they've got that kind of a weakness, they're going to let you down. So I would rather work with somebody whose values, whose integrity I know and trust, because I've spent time with that person, and working on training wherever there might be a weakness. So you develop that weakness, and hopefully you achieve a rounded person, and yet you still deploy the person into avenues and opportunities and causes where they are suited because of their strength. That's a universal principle. But here's what I was trying to get at. When I started on President Mandela's team, and we had two very opposing political, social, and cultural clashes. So if you've seen the movie Invictus, which was produced and directed by Clint Eastwood, then you'd understand that on the one hand you had Black African freedom fighters that were trained all over the world who protected the president from 1990 when he came out of prison until 94 when he became president. And on the other hand, you had a bunch of white police officers like me who were trying to arrest those guys a mere matter of months before. And so that is the environment that I came into as a newly appointed team leader. And I knew, and I don't know how I knew this, maybe if you believe in divine intervention or whatever it was, but there was a still small voice in the back of my head that said to me, Rory, the only way you will ever achieve credibility with such a disparate manpower thrown together at a particular point in history to protect the most famous man in the world is I would have to be 100% fair on any decision that I take. You listen to the merits of both arguments, both sides, and you make your decision based on what is fair and correct. Because then nobody can criticize you later. They may say, I didn't like the decision, but it was a fair decision. And it was what was in the best interest of the team, or in this case, the principle that the team was protecting. And I was put to the test where the planning officer responsible for the security of the venue had taken a few of the protection officers that were part of the president's motorcade. So they arrived with him to the venue where there was a state banquet. And he said to them, please, guys, I need you to cover this door or that window, whatever it was. And the next thing I received a call on the radio. And they called me out there because the people that were deployed were unhappy. They said, listen, we'll do that. I mean, we're all part of one team. So we'll stand there and we'll protect that position. But when the president leaves the state banquet, we have to go with him. Then there's going to be nobody there. And it just so happened that the guys that were posted there were black ANC protection officers, and the person who posted was a white Afrikaner. And so they present this argument to me, Patrick, and I could see in the eyes of the two men that served under my command that they were waiting to see where this commander is going to take this now. Is he going to side with the white guy because he's white? Or is he going to make a decision here based on the facts? And so I weighed up the facts, and I said to the planning officer, I said, you are incorrect. They are correct in what they're saying, because when we leave, when me and my team take the president from here, they have to be in that motorcade. And then that post is left unattended. So you should have planned to have covered that. And nobody minds standing in temporarily. You know, somebody might need to use the bathroom or need to go and fetch something or whatever. And you can call somebody who's who's part of the mobile detail that protects the president and put him there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the understanding that that's still your post. I'm helping you to cover that while you're doing whatever you're doing. You know, Patrick, that going forward from there on, because men and women talk. So obviously those guys talk to their colleagues and say, you know what, this was the issue. It was brought to Rory for a decision. This is the decision he made. And like I said, that, the planning officer afterwards, listen, I didn't like the decision, but when he re-examines that, and if he's honest with himself, he'll realize that it was the correct decision and it was the fair decision. So That's a very long-winded way of answering, for which I apologize. But fairness is a very, very good measuring rod against which to measure any decision.
And I couldn't agree more with you. And as you know, I'm quite strict with my timings on the podcast, but here I need to ask you one more question before we end this. And this is, we talked about the emotion trust, which is kind of very much driving what you and I have done during our careers. But you also, at the origin, came out of a system that was working with fear. And actually, fear driven systems work for a very long time and they are very effective. So, what's your take on fear versus trust?
It's not a question I've been asked very often, Patrick. And my immediate sense would be to say any leadership model or any system that governs based on fear is short-sighted. It's a short-sighted, and it's probably going to be a short-lived position of leadership or short-lived system of government or of leadership.
How long is China living up to this? How long were world-class companies like, many of the IT companies were driven by fear. That's people work there, and it's push and pull. Let's look at what Elon Musk is currently doing with Twitter. Very much based on fear.
Very much based on fear. And again, that's a good example. I don't think that that's going to produce a very good outcome. I may be wrong. And even if it produces a positive outcome in the short term, over the long term, Patrick, it's just not sustainable, because there comes a point where a man or a woman's personal and mental well-being and happiness reaches a limit where they say, I cannot continue to live under this, almost like there's a sword above your head waiting to fall. The fear cannot continue, despite how much you pay me, how good the benefits are. I need to, for the sake of my own well-being and that of my family, I need to come to a position where I don't need to live in fear any longer. If you put that into the context of somebody living in China or in North Korea or in apartheid South Africa, very often that is not within your power to change. However, when it does change, or to the extent that you can change it, then my advice is to move away as quickly as possible from that position that governs or leads based on fear. I have actually lived that, but I was on the other side. I was on the side of the people that were almost inflicting the fear. And that's why I believe that I have today, Patrick, a probably higher than average understanding and tolerance for people who were previously oppressed and disadvantaged. So that's the reason why in 2018, I started a charity that raises funds to protect orphans and widows of police officers who lose their lives in the line of duty in my country. Because whatever we think about the effectiveness or otherwise of the police service and the quality of service and job that they deliver, it's not the fault of that little boy or girl if their mother or father dies at the hand of a violent criminal. And I think I've got a lot more empathy for somebody in that position because of where I worked and the way in which the system under which I was raised treated people. And so I can't put myself in that man or woman's shoes who was the victim of that fear. And then you look, of course, at Nelson Mandela, who on the day he becomes president and he's got all the power, he extends not the fist of revenge and retribution, but he extends the hand of forgiveness and reconciliation.
And that, Rory, is the perfect lead over. So we'll stop with this
Okay.
podcast and your experience, and we'll reconnect in a flash to actually listen about exactly these experiences that you had so far. Thank you very much, and see you in a few moments again.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to our Mission Team podcast. Do not forget to register for the next episode and visit us on mission-team.com.